Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to Archetype. My name's Josh Herman. Welcome to the Gnomon stream. Today we're going to be working on a new character in the Archetype series, which is where we make archetypes based on archetypes, characters based on archetypes. So if you've never seen the stream before, I'm going to show you a little bit of what we've done in the past streams. I'm going to show you my portfolio, so if anybody has questions about that, you can feel free. And then we're going to start on a new character today. As you can maybe tell by the title of the stream that you're watching, we're starting a new one, and we're working on the character known as the Ruler today. So I have some ideas for this, and we're not going to do any 2D sketching. I already have some ideas for this, and I'm just going to kind of jump right into it ASAP. But that means we're basically going to be starting more or less from scratch. So that's where we're at. You should be able to hear me. You should be able to hear some music in the background. If you cannot hear the music in the background, or it's too quiet, or it's too loud, or anything is having issues with the stream, please let me know, and I will adjust. I see a couple people joining the stream. Hello, hope you're doing well. To get some stuff out of the way, right up in here, you're going to see a little thing that says sponsored by Lenovo. This stream is sponsored by Lenovo, so thank you to Lenovo for making the stream happen. Many of our other streams are also sponsored by them. Our Creature Corner, Voice in the Hollow, and our events that we do on our Thursdays, our stage events, are also sponsored by Lenovo, so thank you to them. Let's jump straight into the most recent project that we worked on. So here you can see my portfolio. This is ArtStation. This right here in my portfolio is part of the series of what I've been working on. So you see the very beginning, we started with the artist and the creator, the caregiver, the sage, and we just wrapped up the musician. Not the musician, the magician. And this is the piece that we did here. So this is the piece that I wrapped up last stream. Music is a little low. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. I'm just going to bump it a tad. You tell me if that's too much. If it is, I'll take it back. So that is the one that we worked on last stream. These three pieces here were all rendered in Unreal 5, which is amazing. I'm really loving using this for concept and being able to do a little bit more. I think even if you look at my portfolio here, I've worked on a lot of characters and concept work like that, but most of the time, good examples would be something like a Groot image here. Most of the time it's a character up against a relatively simple background. In reality, almost every single one of these, even this one, has a very simple background and or no background. Thank you for the follow, Jordan. Most of the time it's pretty simple. Even things like this are just like a simple background placement. But what I've been able to do, and my favorite thing about using Unreal, has been, going from pieces where like this is the extent of the background that I'm making, which is mostly covered in smoke and very graphic, which is fun. But things like this become an option where you can now create megascans and fog and distance, and you can do far more from an environmental and storytelling point than you have, or I have been able to do before. So I've really been liking that. As a way to use it. This is the first piece we did in the series, and it was actually done in Marmoset. So really been enjoying exploring some different styles of working and learning a lot along the way. Obviously I could make things better, and there's things I want to learn, but it's been a cool process to do. So let's jump back into our Trello board. In case you've never seen this before, this is the board that I've been using to kind of track my progress. So the characters that we can select are here on the left-hand side. The wheel of where the characters are is right here. So the ones that we've been working on so far is the caregiver, the artist, and the magician. And we're going to jump back into this corner again. We're basically going to get all these blue ones out of the way, and I'm going to do the ruler. The ruler cares about control. So we're going to make a kind of a ruling character here who would basically be dominating or overseeing a lot of stuff. And they like to provide structure. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're villainous. It just means that they like to have control of something, right? And they like to provide structure. That can be for good as well. So I'm gonna aim for more of a good angle on this, and we'll have some fun with that today. And as I've been doing this, I would basically take these cards, and in Trello you can take this one, so the ruler is one that we're using here, and it would kind of move it along until it was completed, and we put it in this done column, and so you can see all the ones that are done. I really like using this because it's a great way to organize your thoughts, but also kind of use it as a visual checklist. So definitely think, yes, I like it a lot. Yes, the ruler is definitely Which you think is the most common villain archetype? Yeah, I think like even like this one is like I don't remember the title, but it's like Snow from Hunger Games is definitely like a ruler who must have control over the situation. You know, being their greatest fears are being chaos or being overthrown. Like somebody that in this type of a position often is seen as a villain, and that's not really what I want. I want my ruler. I want my ruler to be somebody who's more caring, and their fear and wanting to build, and their fears of being of chaos or being overthrown is that, you know, maybe the peace or whatever that they've been able to implement has been goes away, right, and it hurts the people which they're building for. So that's what I have some ideas. I have some initial inspiration. The initial inspiration that I have is some Mobius work. So this type of work here, you know, kind of a costume, maybe a person with a headdress. This is very pixelated, but this kind of style is what I'm looking at over on my own side. And that's what we're going to do today. So let's jump into Zbrush. So what I've got loaded up is I've got this head. This is a basic head. I know it says from scratch, but if you're somebody who has never used Zbrush before, or, you know, this isn't really cheating, the way you get this as a starting point is you basically hit comma, or you can go to your light box, which would be up in the top left, and you go to project, head planes, and you can just select this, and this is what I've used right here. I personally really like using this because it's a great start to a humanoid face, that you don't have to spend, oh goodness, time, you know, getting to this point. I could sculpt this from a sphere. I feel pretty confident in that. I think most people could. It's not a terribly complicated sculpt, so it just kind of fast tracks. I lost my pen. Where did my pen go? It just fast tracks the ability to get to this point. So if you're going to work on something fast, it's just a little bit easier. All right, we're going to start working on this today. And again, I think I want to do like sort of a headdress, maybe a little bit of, you know, some stuff there. And I want to figure out, if I was going to do a composition, it would probably be a very symmetrical composition. I kind of like those. So we're going to get started now. What I'm going to start doing is I like using this base, and I like starting with the move brush. So if you've never used this before, kind of a tip for you right now is to start out with the move brush and just start using it as large shapes. This can be a way for you to adjust proportions, adjust shapes generally, and then we can start getting into some of the forms. I'm not going to do anything crazy wild. It's just going to be of all the characters we've done, none of them have been humanoid, and so this is going to be the first humanoid character. And then I start drawing shapes. So I like sculpting the eyes first, because then I can start finding who this character is. One tip that I like to use is I like to use the clay buildup brush here, and I'll kind of basically, my favorite thing about the clay buildup brush is you can kind of overlap and create forms, because it will whatever stroke you do will overlap the previous one. So you can see how it's almost got this weaving effect going on here. And all you have to do to make a quick simple eyelid and a concept for eyelids is just make sure you know that they're on top. Like the top one is on top of that, right? So we'll build up some form, and then we'll make a lower one here. And then the last stroke I always try to do on top, and that kind of just gives me the visual that this is sitting on top. And then I'll use the Damien standard brush and kind of create an arc here to just get some eyes in. And at first it's not going to look great, but we'll fill this in as we continue to work. And it's important for me when I work to get these in, because now I can start dragging this around and figuring out exactly what this is. The next element that I start putting in on this when I use these types of bases is I like to use find the bones. So I'm going to chisel away here, and it's going to be a little bit more gaunt than I want it to be when it's done. But to find the cheekbones. Those bottom eyes in here too, just a little bit. Sometimes when starting like this, it can make something feel a little gaunt, a little skeletal. and often because those forms are more angular and they resemble elements that are closer to the face, they can make things look a little older. So I'm gonna have to try to dial this back. I do want this to be a slightly younger character. Good question from Drawn Skull. I'm gonna put it on the screen. It's quite a long one, but we'll get to it in a second. You have a question about the BFA in digital production. Does the program teach you a certain aspect of digital production, or does it teach you everything, like movie animation, game art, animation, VFX, etc.? Really good question. This program, or all of the Gnomon programs, are generalist as a whole. I think that's an important thing to note, is that all of the programs are generalist. So you will learn the basics of everything. Now each of the programs, especially the BFA, has track selections, or you can also think of it like as a concentration or a minor. So you will have a focus in generalist, game art, or VFX. To go through those quickly, basically the generalist program is going to teach you everything to work in games, animated films. Generalist, right? You can be a character artist, environment artist, anything like that, animator as well. It will cover, you can look through the curriculum on our website, but you'll be able to see that you'll basically cover everything from concept, modeling, texturing, lighting, compositing, rendering, effects, animation, and go through the whole pipeline. Within that, you'll be able to choose a couple electives, and you'll be able to kind of curate your classes to be a little bit more to what you want, meaning if you want to focus in being a character artist, you want to focus in being an animator, you want to focus in being something, you can do that. The other tracks, the other concentrations are there for people who want to focus on something different, that's maybe more specialized. So that's why the VFX concentration exists, is for people who want to do specifically VFX animation. So you want to be in Houdini, you want to be in Maya, you love explosions, fire, smoke, simulations, destructions, demolition. That is all stuff that's going to be coming from that concentration. So if you know that kind of stuff, that's a good one for you. You'll still get a generalist education. I think it's important to note that about all of our programs, is they are still generalist. So you will still, even if you go into the VFX program, you'll still learn modeling, texturing, shading, lighting, composition, all that kind of stuff. That will all be part of it. But the last one is the games track, and that's more to be a game artist, game developer. They're both great choices. So hopefully that answers your question. Basically, the answer is yes, you will learn a little bit of everything from the very beginning to the very end, but you'll still have time to specialize in whatever it is that you want. Good question. If everybody has questions today, whether it's about what I'm working on, whether it's about Gnomon things, curriculum things, that is totally fine. Happy to answer them. All right. So I've just been blocking this out a little bit, and I'm making trying to chisel off some of these edges. It's feeling a little harsh, a little aggressive. I'm going to get some work done on the nose here. A little tip for people when you're sculpting faces, one of the ways that I like to start making a nose is, it feels weird, but I think I've said this on stream a couple times, but make the nostril shape, right? And then actually look at it from the bottom. If you kind of define what the nostril shape is from the bottom, what this shape is, we probably all looked at our nose like in the mirror or up, there's different ways to do that, right? You'll notice that what that does is it creates an easy way to define what that shape should look like. And then when you start coming to the profiles, you can define what the profile and other shapes of that are. But it's an easier way to kind of understand what the shape of the nose is. There's kind of like a central column, like a bulb at the end, this middle kind of septum, and these two areas. And the other thing I like to do is I like to pull, I'm going to take this, we'll mask it, we'll see if that works, but pull this deep inside. Because that's what happens in the nose. And this kind of helps define the shape. much more from a sculptural level. Like, what is this shape actually going to be? And, you know, it would take some time to fix it and figure it out. But for me, it always makes it feel just a little bit more natural than not. Rob, you know it's early, but do I have any thoughts on a scene for this yet? Probably somebody sitting in a chair, you know, very ruler-like, or somebody like looking at lots of kinds of things. Center composition, symmetrical. Come on. You know, center composition with something in the middle, kind of sitting around here with lots of stuff going on. That's kind of where I'm at. All right. I don't want to have too much emphasis on the nose. I want it to kind of feel a little smaller. Can always make a fancy mustache. Dronslow, you're currently at Jacksonville getting your AA degree to transfer into FSU for your film degree, but if you don't know what you're going to do. That's a hard point. It's a hard point when you're in that position of figuring out what your next steps are. Trying to just block in a line here for like, what I'm trying to do is kind of get the angle of the mouth and also the position of the mouth, meaning is the mouth here, is the mouth here, is the mouth here. Most people will put it in the middle, and that's a pretty straightforward place to start, but this character's being a little older than I wanted them to be. There's a lot of static in my headphones. I think it's just my speakers are dying. Do I have any tips for hand health as an artist using a mouse and a tablet all day? My best tips for that is to switch. So use both. That's always been a thing for me, is I use a mouse, use a tablet. You know, you can use both, and there's not really one that's better. I think, you know, for sculpting, obviously, if you need pen pressure or you need something like that, that's obviously going to be valuable for you. So, you know, but if you can use a mouse in a program, use a mouse, and you know, if your hand starts to hurt, for me, I always start to switch to a tablet. So that's kind of the way that I've always worked at it, is just constantly going back and forth to whatever the most needed one is. Whatever way's not hurting me is the way that I'm going to do this. All right, I'm going to try to focus on the sculpt. I've been talking a lot, and the sculpt is suffering for that. So let's spend a little time on this. Also note that you can always move stuff around, right? That's part of working in 3D. Part of the joy of working in 3D is you don't have to always... I basically just made a character that is like a generic dude. I didn't really want to make a generic dude. So I can either spend the time to be like, let's fix this. I think this is because I was just talking the whole time. Pardon me, like my basic forms, some recipes that I have. A recipe, or what a recipe is, in case you don't know what it is it's something, shapes that you often go back to over and over. So for me, it would be like, oh, this isn't working. Okay, I'll create this shape, and I'll create this shape, and I'll create this shape, and I'll create some very aggressive shapes up here. You know, and then I could tell you, like, this is a form language that I could quickly go to. But I'm trying to break that right now. Hello there. Yeah, welcome to the stream, Emperor of Cheese. I love usernames. They're so good. You Emperor of all cheese? Hello there, hello there. Welcome to the stream. Hope you're all doing well. Let's get a face in here. I just want to get the face to a point where it's not distracting, and I feel like it's kind of in the right direction. Since we started, from a base head, we're starting with something that I think is a good start, but it's not like exactly what I want. So just trying to work through a little bit more of this. Eyes are really subpar right now. I'm just not nailing it. What does it take to get into Gnomon? The first step to Gnomon is working with our admissions team. So if you're talking to our admissions team, they kind of work. You have to submit an application with a portfolio. We don't let just everybody into the school. You do have to get accepted via an application and your portfolio, and that's a key part of the application process here at Gnomon is the portfolio. So you have to have a portfolio, and working with an admissions advisor, they'll help you with that. They'll help you get your portfolio up and running. They'll help you do all that kind of stuff and give you feedback. And some people work with our admissions team for many years. This is looking awful. I'm gonna have to start over, I think, on this face. Just one of those ones where you start, and you're like, what, maybe this is just the warm-up. Hang on 1 second. But yeah, getting into Gnomon is basically about, your portfolio and working with our admissions teams. Sometimes if something is really bothering me, I'll just Dynamesh. And in this case, I'm going to Dynamesh just because this is annoying me. But what's happening, as you probably noticed, is like basically this is the shapes that I'm getting to. And actually, I don't mind this shape, which is weird. So something that I like to, part of the process of this show is showing what it takes to make something live. And sometimes when I'm working on a project, I don't like it. Like right now I'm all undo and I don't like what this is looking like, right? This is not a very good sculpt for me right now. So I'm going to basically erase it all, but I'm going to use those forms that I got to get there. And for me, for some reason, this softer forms is actually getting more to what I wanted, which is actually great. So I'm going to use this as my next kind of leaping off point and go from there. I'm only going to focus on this part of the face. I think I'm going to make a headdress, like I had showed some of the Mobius inspiration. I think that's what I'll be using for this. And now I can use this softer form, which still has underlying forms there, as a way to start. So what I'm doing, I see the question about anatomy books. I will definitely address that in 1 second. I'm just trying to get to a good point where I feel like I can actually progress from this for the stream today. So I do want to address your question. I will address your question, but just trying to get a little bit further along. It's been interesting. Like this character was something I was just thinking about is the ruler, right? And part of what their job would be to rule. And I was just thinking about there's so many young rulers like in history, and even just thinking about things like Game of Thrones and like Joffrey and Tommen and all them, and how that probably, like, there's not, like, you know, especially for the actual historical ones, like there's not a lot of imagery of those people because cameras didn't exist, right? And how much that probably aged them so quickly. You know, I've seen a lot of people in the past couple months being, you know, with the anniversary early this month of, you know, pandemic starting realistically, right? 2 years. And how people are like pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, and a lot of people have like seen a lot of age in themselves from all the stress and everything. And it was making me think about this of if somebody was like, you know, some of them were super young, 12 or younger, 9. That put a huge impact on you. Yeah, the presidential portraits is another one. Yeah, like Obama before election and post-election. It's 8 years. 8 years is a long time, but I feel like you look at the average person who doesn't have those pressures put on them. So as I was making this, what I'm trying to get to, and I'm not quite there yet, right? But it's just that if this was a younger ruler or somebody who had started younger, maybe they still have younger, softer features, which is kind of what I was going for, why I kind of started over here. There could still maybe be that weight, how to portray like that weight and that age of a person, the responsibility that they would hold. This fucking music with this dramatic monologue I'm talking about is ridiculous. I think Drawn Skull, I mean, I'm a Gnomon alum, I can speak to that. I think Gnomon was something that added a huge, huge amount to my potential as an artist, right? I went to a school before Gnomon. I went to a school that ended up getting shut down by the government. If you know anything about the American educational industry in the past 2 decades, it's not all good there. I don't know, it was great for me. So I don't know about your situation too much. But I'd recommend it. I think it's worth trying. If you're considering going to another program, it sounds like anyways. I would reach out to our admissions team and chat with them. Just schedule a meeting, schedule a consultation, just have a conversation about like what it would take, what would they need. And you might get a lot of insight there. Tell them Josh sent you. That's not a real thing. You can tell them that, but yeah. All right, I'm kind of liking the softer features here. Definitely falling into some comfort shapes, but I don't want to go into full harsh shapes either. And that's okay. Also, you know, looking at like teenagers, you know, looking at teenagers in this could be like an interesting thing for a ruler of like, you know, a ruler who's been young, but you know, part of what they were doing, you know, in those times was being educated, right? Being educated on war, being educated on politics, being educated on, you see this even in fantasy things like Game of Thrones, where like the people who are being groomed to be kings or to be whatever are like learning all of these skills that they would need to be kings. And by somebody who being like 15, 14, even though it's so young, that the fact they'd be learning that stuff to do that could be really, really interesting. Yeah, I don't know. There's something there. I just find it a fascinating thing. We're not going to see the back of this head. We're probably not going to see much of this neck at all. What I'm really just trying to do is work in the round, meaning you're going to work in the whole character at once. And even though this won't be seen, or very likely won't be seen, it's something that I know is more or less correct, and if I wanted to show parts of it or not show parts of it, I could. Put it through an aging yet. A lot of people were telling that public universities don't really teach that much at all. I don't know if I can, I'm not going to comment on that to like a high degree. I think it depends on what your focus is or what your interest is. You know, I didn't go to public universities. I went to 2 private universities, Gnomon being one of them. And my experience was that Gnomon being a smaller school, which was highly specialized, had a much more, in my opinion, better education than a school who was a bit more broad, because it was highly focused in teaching what I wanted it to learn. So. If that's helpful at all. All right, we're getting close to where I can talk about something else now, and I've actually been able to get to a point where I feel like this isn't a complete disaster on stream. So let me just do a little bit more work, and we'll get back into this in a sec. But somebody was asking about books. I love talking about books. Something about this makes me want it to have a slightly longer neck. Profile of the neck's a little jacked, so we're going to adjust that in a minute, but I also want to like make it not so it's like some giant muscular person. right, we'll start with this. I'm going to save real quick. Save as, just make a new folder because I hadn't yet. Make a new folder for my sculpts. You guys can't see, but that's fine. Okay, let's talk about some books. Somebody was asking up here, books. All right, let me find my books that I want to find. Where is it? I'm looking for my figure drawing book. One of my favorite drawing books or books that I generally recommend to people is Figure Drawing and Invention by Steve Hampton or Michael Hampton. It is an amazing figure drawing book that I cannot seem to find because I don't know why. Did I pull it off the shelf? Sometimes I use it, and so I don't know where it went. It's over here. It's over here somewhere. No, that's invincible. Yeah, I don't know where it is. That's a problem. Other books that I like, some people were asking about anatomy, but so I'll show you a couple other things that I like. Anatomy books. I think that the Anatomy by Artists or Anatomy for Artists series is actually quite good, so I would highly recommend that one generally. I think it's a really good one. Books. I think books, a lot of people now, I feel like that makes me sound so old, but it's the truth. I feel like a lot of people now don't really read as many books, which is really sad. But I think that they're probably the best way to learn. Like, I think that when you look at what people, the way that people consume and the way that people look at things right now is heavily, I'm still trying to find that one book, but it's all online. There's so much online, and I'm not trying to bash online. Oh, I found it. It's great. It's super accessible. Everybody has access to it, and that's wonderful. But the problem is that, especially from a resource standpoint, a learning standpoint, there's, and especially reference, there's so many things that only exist in books and haven't been scanned, or you're not looking at the same thing that everybody else is. So the first book that I recommend, and this is specifically for characters, is Figure Drawing, Design, and Invention. This is by Michael Hampton here. Michael's amazing. This book is great. It teaches, it talks about anatomy as anatomy, but it also talks about figure drawing. If you want to be a good sculptor, you probably want to be a good figure artist, right? I think it's something that's pretty important to kind of have. This music is getting intense. So I highly recommend this one. It teaches you figure drawing. It teaches you lines of action. It teaches you posing. It teaches you anatomy. It teaches you how to think of the character in more terms than just muscles and bones, even though it also does teach you and talk to you about muscles and bones, right? So this book is one that I recommend to everybody who's interested in characters. Great. If you're interested in sculpting and all that kind of stuff, and you want to be a character artist or figure artist, this is a great book, Modeling and Sculpting the Human Figure. This is a traditional clay sculpting book, and so there's a lot of pictures of, people sculpting noses in clay and stuff like that. I highly, highly recommend these. Another person who does great books on traditional clay sculpting, which helps teach you form and stuff like that, is Philippe Farreau. Take a look at him. For other figure drawing books, and especially for sculpture, George Bridgman. George Bridgman's The Human Machine. There's a ton of things by George Bridgman. These are relatively cheap, and some of them are online, but it is a older school style of anatomy teaching and how things work and breaking things down. But the thing that's interesting about how Bridgman draws and thinks about things is very mechanical in nature. So like how the bones in the arm and bones in the legs function, right? All of that stuff is really important, and how the muscles make them move, right? This is obviously the human machine, so talking about the human machine, how it functions, can be helpful to help you break it down, but also help you expand on it once you have a good understanding of it. And then this isn't specifically for animals. I don't have a good animal anatomy book personally, but for reference and for looking for things outside of the norm, this book, Atlas Obscura, is a really beautiful, wonderful book to a guide to the world's hidden wonders. But just for reference and all kinds of things in there, just flipping to a page and finding, something about West Africa and the beautiful shots of things that exist in there. Um, you find things that you didn't expect, right? Just because it wasn't. You're not going to search for that on Pinterest, right? You're going to search for interesting textures, and you'll get interesting textures, but you're going to get interesting textures that everybody else sees when they search for interesting textures. Just kind of how it works, right? So I try to avoid that if possible. Where did I go? Hide. Great. You're going to talk to Gnomon. Good, you should. I would highly recommend it. Got another question. When you are doing client work, can you talk about how your workflow on how you come up with different design variations for characters? Do you do all of them in Zbrush? Really good question. Not all of it in Zbrush, though sometimes it's... Okay, so it's going to depend on what the goal is and also what the timeline is. So if something is going to be, fast, like they want 5 variations in a day, it's impossible for me, the way that I work at least, to do that in ZBrush just because, it's impossible. There's no way I could make 5 sculpts and 5 renders and, do the stuff that I've been doing in that amount of time. So if that was the goal, what I would probably do is do a sculpt and then paint over that sculpture to create variations in Photoshop. I don't think I'm going to see the ears, but I'm just going to block them out briefly so that I can move on with this character a little bit. I'm still not quite capturing everything I want to with it before I move on. And hopefully we'll get a little further than this. I was hoping to get more of the costume blocked out today. But I've been talking a lot and, that's just how it is. Is Pinterest a good source for finding anatomy and references? Good question. It is a good source for finding anatomy and references. The only challenge, or kind of what I was just saying, is there's certain things that you want to, that it's okay, in my opinion, to look at what everybody else is looking at. If you want to find anatomy references, pictures of bodybuilders, pictures of, things that are a core fundamental thing, yeah, sure. Go look at Pinterest. There's a million amazing boards that other people have made, or you can make your own boards, and you should, curate your own. That will help you for sure. No questions asked. The downside is when you start looking for references, meaning you want to be artistic references and you want to maybe make your own mark, right? That is when I find it to be not as good, because yes, you can find cool things. I'm not saying you can't find cool things or interesting things, but you just need to be conscious of that you are looking at what a lot of other people are looking at. And some of those things used to be, they are still very cool, right? But they might have been something where it was a very rare thing. Here's a random thing that probably doesn't exist, but you might help the analogy. There's a beautiful bright blue. This is probably from Batman Begins, which is why I'm thinking about it. But a beautiful bright blue flower at the top of a mountain that you can only see if you travel this mountain or look in books of, you know, the Himalayas or whatever this fictional mountain is, right? And it's stunning, and it has amazing textures and qualities, and when you see it, it lights you up inspirationally and creatively, and you want to make something based off of this wonderful flower you saw, right? The problem with Pinterest now is if you type in beautiful flower, this thing that used to be a rare, unique thing that very few people in the world knew about becomes something that's on 70% of reference boards. And now everybody knows about this thing, and everybody is inspired by it and thinks it's amazing, and they want to make art based off of it too. So it's not necessarily that it's bad for references. Yes, it's amazing for references. You can do more than you've ever done, right? You can see more than you've ever seen. It's more accessible than it's ever been. I think those are all excellent. That is all excellent qualities to this thing, you know, to the internet, to Pinterest, all that stuff. Those are all the best parts of it. But there are some downsides or negatives to it, in my opinion, and that's what those things are, is all of a sudden things can just kind of feel like a visual conglomerate. So depending on where you're at in your artistic career or what your goals are for projects, you know, just be aware of that. That's not to say it's a tool you shouldn't use. It's just be cautious of using it. Can you tell me how I can really practice arms? Because your drawings of arms totally suck. Sure. We can talk about arms for 1 second. Let me see if I can load up Photoshop real fast. There it is. That was quick. I'm using a trial of Photoshop because we're transitioning some licenses, so if it crashes, we'll have to deal with that. But let's get past this real fast. When you're drawing characters and, you know, anatomy, obviously you can look at arms. You can look at reference points. So let's find a picture of an arm. I'm just going to use the internet real fast. We'll just search for bodybuilder arm. Bodybuilder arm. We're going to find a good image. 1 second. They're all like super flexed arms, and I'm trying to find a good example of like a... There we go. This will give us a pretty good example. It's not perfect. I don't want to go to Twitter. It's trying to make me go to Twitter. All right. Just browse for a couple more seconds, see if I can find a better photo. No, this will do. Okay. No worries. Thank you for coming to the stream. All right. Let's talk about arms. And it's not going to be just about arms. I'll give you, the example of what I'm going for here. No problem. I think this is an interesting thing as we're talking about character design, and it's kind of the basics of sculpting characters, modeling characters, basic stuff like that. So the thing that I want to kind of to use as a reference point is talking about rhythm. I learned this from Zach Petrock, from some of his online classes and stuff like that. It's an amazing artist who worked at Disney, or works at Disney, I believe. But when we talk about figure drawing and characters, you know, I think that a lot of people will come into this and they'll say, all right, I'm going to draw this arm. And so they're going to like try to understand where every muscle is. And they're going to go through, you know, I shouldn't be drawing on this layer. Right. And they're going to try to break down where everything is and what all these things are and what they do and all that stuff. And so when they start drawing it, they start trying to replicate the small shapes that, and trying to understand how the sum of those shapes equal a whole. And often what that does is it creates things that don't feel like they're not proportional overall. So first off, don't come in and start saying, you know, here's the muscle, here's the muscle, here's the muscle, because you're just going to have something that looks like a weird bunch of lines. It's not going to look good, right? So approach it from a holistic level, the whole object, and start breaking down the shapes within the shapes. Not the small shapes, but what the big shape is. And the quick example of that is, you know, a lot of people, if maybe you've seen this before, but if we're going to start making an arm, it's not just making the tricep and the bicep and the elbow and the forearm and the hand, you know, and the shoulder. Because what this kind of looks like is, even though you know, this is an exaggeration, if the shoulder's here, right, and their hoodie or whatever comes here, we're not thinking about the rhythm and we're not thinking about the flow. We've kind of gotten lost in just that this is an object, this is an object, and this is an object. And in reality, there's a flow and a rhythm to this. So the quick example of this that I'm going to use generally is the body. So we'll start with a head, right? My tablet feels a little off, but there's a head here, right? This is the front of the body. And the neck kind of comes back and the head's going to be here, right? And we're going to make the chest. And the chest is kind of flat in the back where your spine is, right? And then the rib cage kind of tilts up like this. And you'll get the point of what I'm going for. I'm going to undo some of this because it's a little jank. Just going to go like this. There you go, a little simpler. The rib cage is here, and then the pelvis kind of tilts this way. Right. And what's going on right now is you can kind of understand that this is the front of the face and this is the back of the face, but there's an internal rhythm to this already, which most people don't see. When you think about rhythm, you know, it's about making something interesting as well as understanding how it works. So there is a gesture of this part of the body moving forward and this part of the body moving backwards and this part moving forward and this part moving backwards. There is a constant back and forth to the relationship that's happening here. So if we even just draw this down and up, right, you'll get a sense of how this can look. Maybe this pelvis is a little far. Right? And then we'll continue this. So the legs start here, right? That's the great trochanter. But some of those muscles go up into the thigh, into the pelvis. So we'll do like a big sweeping curve for that. Maybe a little bulky for this character. And we're going to continue that down through the leg. And then we're going to make the ankle, and the foot's going to come out. And if we basically go from here and draw a line all the way up, you'll kind of get a sense of where this is going. But there's a forward motion and a backward motion and a forward motion to the human body. There's a constant rhythm to the human body. And so when you're doing one individual element, aside from the fact of don't come in and just focus on one thing, you want to focus on the overall element. So when we're looking at the shoulders here, right, we're seeing that there's different peaks. So even on this guy, right, there's different peaks to what's happening. Where is the peak of everything that's kind of happening, right? We can see there's a peak of the shoulder. It's kind of coming in the back, and it's kind of slanted forward. The back of the tricep starts here. It's coming down. And then the peak of that is going to go kind of this direction. And the bicep, the peak of the bicep is lower than the peak of the tricep. And that's actually being overlapped here by all these other things. So I'm not a great 2D artist, but this style of breaking down things is always helpful for me knowing that there's an in and an out and an in and an out and an in and an out, and you know, this kind of repetition can be seen all over the body, but it kind of comes down to the fact that make sure that things are, you know, rather than being the balloons, a lot of people use this analogy of saying shoulder, you know, arm, elbows here, hand, right? Rather than it feeling like sausages that are linked together, that it should feel more like this. I made too many, but something that's kind of different, right? And that'll make it feel more dynamic and make it feel more accurate, and it'll just give it more life. So hopefully that's helpful with drawing arms and just generally thinking about the human body and getting into figure drawing and all that fun stuff. Got a question from YouTube. Most of the sculpt art that you see is full body characters. The question for making the full body character, is it very important that when you start, you always start with the head? No, it's not important. It's not important that you start with the head. You can start with the whatever part you like to. Most people start with the head just because it's the central thing that most people look at. Typically, you know, if you're doing concept work, you know, people start with the head also because it's the face, and that's often what people are looking at is the face. So, no, it's not super important that you start with the head. Let's do some costume work now. Just a block out. I'm just going to duplicate this. I'm going to smooth it out. I'm solo moding, so it's the only thing I'm really seeing right now. So you can see it's mirrored on the inside of this. Looks like a braid. Yeah, it does kind of look like a braid. So I basically have created a internal shell to this, or I created a shell for this. This makes it, this is a style of work that I like to do where I basically create base meshes inside of the existing mesh that I sculpted. And I like to use this for the design standpoints because now what I can do is I can take and stretch and grab this mesh and pull it out whenever I want, wherever I want, to create whatever shapes that I want. And it seems to work pretty well for me. So I'm going to just kind of pull some of this out. I'm going to try to create some graphical shapes, meaning this is going to be more like, this is from some of the Mobius stuff for sure. So similarly, when I was making, you know, foundational, don't love the profile of this head. A lot to do there. Just going to try to get large, strong graphic shapes so that even if they're not perfect, again, this is the ruler, something, some form of a headdress, so, you know, starting with something that could cover the face. I always liked how Mobius had these like bills. So we're going to be inspired by Mobius. Let's just run with it. No worries, I'm glad it was helpful. some of the weight that I put in those eyes is definitely aging the character very quickly. I kind of like that. I kind of don't like it though. Let's add just a sphere. I'll turn this into a Dynamesh object. Pretty easy. Just go geometry, Dynamesh, hit this button. I'm going to make it low resolution. Symmetry on. That was interesting. I kind of like that, whatever that is. What do I want to name him? I don't know. I'm not sure what the name is. Spider-Man across the Spider-Verse. Yeah, that looks incredible. Just love that. The first one. So good. So good. Something that Mobius did often, I'm looking at a couple pieces of reference now, is also just tie the costumes in. So this was a pretty common thing. I think it's fine to start with this reference points, but, you know, maybe draw it away later. One of the challenges when you go from Dynamesh or make something from a sphere is that you have to invent everything. Meaning, that's why, you know, starting with a base mesh for the face is cool, because you get to do a little bit more. You get a little further faster, whereas you're not inventing the overall shape language from the very beginning. And not just shape language for, like, you know, the design, the actual thing that you want to make, but the shape language for, like, what an arm looks like, what a body looks like, and that stuff can take time. But at the same point, even though, you know, it's faster to have base meshes and to do things from scratch sometimes, there's still a lot of appeal in it for me to sometimes just do it from scratch. Sometimes it's just a fun challenge. I'm not going to dynamesh this one super high. Not for a while, just because I don't want to mess with these hands, and I'm just kind of getting everything blocked in, so. Kind of looking like a toy soldier right now. Am I watching Marvel shows? I've watched all the Marvel shows. I'm not. I think Moon Knight came out last night. We're caught up on that, so we'll be watching that tonight probably. Oh, this one song on the playlist needs to go away. There we go. Well, yeah, I'm caught up on all the shows. I'm really digging it. I'm also going through, this is probably, if anybody's got recommendations, I never really was into anime. For some reason, it just never hit me. And so I've been now going through a list, creating a watch list of things that I should watch or want to watch, and just kind of starting that right now. And obviously, which is fun, because it's so much cool stuff out there that I hadn't really ever exposed myself to. So I'm watching a lot of anime. I just finished. I've heard the series is better, but to get into it, I just finished the Berserk trilogy, which was pretty amazing. No, I never watched a lot of anime. I was more Western cartoons when I was a kid. This is kind of what I'm saying about like having to do everything from scratch can be really difficult, because now I'm like having to decide how big legs are. So it's kind of fun to do it from scratch because you're getting to do that, right? And getting to define like what the character is actually going to look like. But at the same point, it is a different process, a lot more work. Is this person shorter? Are they squatter? Are they taller? Are they thinner? Like, these are all things you can explore. You can do this with a pre-made base mesh as well. I'm not saying you can't. John School, you love Jimmy Neutron. That was my brother, one of my brother's favorite shows. He loved Jimmy Neutron. So at this point, you know, we're about an hour 15 in. We got 45 more minutes left in the stream. This is where I find I've kind of gotten to the point where I understand, I'm starting to understand now a little bit more about who this character is. And for me, it's once I start to see it all together. That's a really important part. I have to be able to see it together. I can have ideas, you know, and reference points and start getting it working. But if I can't actually begin building it and see the whole thing, it's really hard for me to visualize just based off of, like, you know, saying words sometimes. I'm using Mobius as my primary inspiration for this right now. So you can definitely see that in the head shape, even some of what's going on here. Maybe not so much these, but it's just kind of exploring some shapes. When you get into filmmaking animation, you don't want to work on an existing IP all the way through. You want to create your own characters and worlds. That's going to be very difficult to start from the very beginning of your career making your own IPs and worlds. Just because there's an appetite for that, but it's mostly, you know, you're talking about creating IPs and pitches and selling them to networks to get sold. Obviously, you could create them yourself and try to publish and sell them yourself, but the challenge is getting enough publications and notoriety, and getting people to notice them is really difficult. You know, there's so much content out there. So, not to burst your bubble on it, but that is a very challenging, that would be a very challenging goal to hit. You know, even people like James Cameron who want to create their own IPs and worlds didn't start out in that. James Cameron's first movie was Piranha 3 or Piranha 2, The Spawning. That was what he directed as a short before he came in to sub in for the director before he wrote and directed Terminator. And before that, he was in the prop and special effects departments. So even somebody who's huge and iconic like a James Cameron, or you can look at probably most other filmmakers who you're thinking about saying, like, this is who I want to be or this is what I love, none of them started in doing their own thing from the very beginning. So I have this other mesh under here, and I'm going to start using this as a way to add some more interest. There needs to be something different to this, though. Basically taking this straight from Mobius. So basically when I got into starting some type of VFX department or something like that to get and grow bigger, it's not just when you graduate or, you know, you're coming from school, you don't have really an experience. And experience often equates to trust in relationships, business relationships. So you may have a cool idea, you may have interesting characters, but you have no experience for people to understand that you can execute that, you could do that. You know, to make your own IP, to make your own world, you know, there's a huge investment that people have to make. And that's really where it kind of comes down to, is that business element. It is the entertainment business, the entertainment industry. It's not the most exciting part about it, but it is the truth. It doesn't mean that the dream isn't achievable. Meaning if you want to create your own IPs and worlds and that's what you really want to do, it's definitely achievable. And that's why I was just kind of cautioning doing it straight out of school, your first job. That's a hard ask. It's hard to do. Which tablet am I using? I believe I'm using an Intuos 5 Touch. Several years old at this point, but still working. Still does good. I want to add more elements, but I don't really want to use this mesh because it's not everywhere else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this mesh and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to go into this time I'm going to do a deformation palette. I'm going to go inflate and I'm going to type negative, let's just say 5. Maybe more than that. Negative 10. You see it kind of subtly moved. So now when I show 2 of them, this is what I have. Here's the outside one, here's the inside one. There's a very thin line here, so I'm actually going to make this go in a little bit further. We'll just use this slider like that. And then I'm also just going to erase some of this. I'll do it later. But this is a similar method that I did when I was making the headdress, being able to pull it out of the top. I'm going to do the same kind of thing with this character now. So there's one inside and there's one outside. If I select the one inside, I can sculpt anywhere I want and I get a nice base mesh for that location. I'm going to add a little bit more on this first. I'm going to double the resolution of the Dynamesh. It's basically effectively doubling the amount of detail that I can create and the types of shapes that I can create. So sculpting in Zbrush, and a lot of people get confused about details and all that stuff. When should I subdivide? What should my max polygons be? What subdivision level do you go to? You know, all that kind of fun stuff um, isn't really important. The most important thing about is, do you have enough resolution or detail for what you need? So in this instance, actually in almost every time I sculpt, I like to start with as little detail as I possibly can and build up to the max detail that I need, not the max detail my computer can handle. And what that means is, like, what I just did here was I upped the resolution. I increased the Dynamesh to double what it was. And that was because to make a shape even as simple as something like this, like a little spike or something, if I wanted to create some texture, I can't do that because there wasn't enough geometry there. So I don't find, for me at least, that the need for detail is driven by, you know, what I want to, how many pores I want to put on there. I find that it's more about there's something interesting with that touching the face. It's more about the shapes that I want to create and if the detail supports it. And in some ways it's the same thing, but I think the way that I look at it is more, do I need to add this? Do I need to have this in my scene? And typically the answer is no. Drawn School, I think, you know, the last piece of advice I would give you is, it sounds like you have some big goals, and that's great. I would look up people who you aspire to, who you look at and say, like, this person has the career that I want or that I dream of. And maybe there's nobody that has that, but I would try to find people who at least have, like, an a somewhat inkling of that. You know, maybe there's a parallel path, or, you know, something there. I would find those people and I would research what their careers were. So maybe it's not Cameron. Maybe that's a bad example. You know, maybe it's Miyazaki, right? Maybe it's Kojima. Whatever the person or thing it is that you like the most, who's got a big career, who's got big games, or made something that you like, find them, research them, and understand what they did. How did they get to where they are? Maybe there's information from there that you can glean. Maybe not, but understanding, you know, the path that other people took to get to the same dream that you have, it's never going to hurt. So at this point, I'm also going to look at my older work. Not like crazy older work, but where'd it go? I had it up. And I want to look for what I'm doing already, and I want to avoid that. So I know that I don't really want to do. Like this big horns shape. I was like really interested in making this big horn shape. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do. I'm kind of leaning, like my natural instincts were to kind of go in this direction, which is getting a little hard. So I don't want to do like these big pauldrons of spikes, because now all of a sudden I'm going to line these characters up or put them next to each other in my portfolio, and they're going to look very similar, which is what I don't want. So probably going to find another solution for this. To create shapes in there that will be more interesting for me. So I'm going to whittle it away. And let's do some new shapes. Let's try something different. And this is the hardest part, I think, of design. When you start getting into doing the design of a character, is like, how do I change it? Just, you get comfortable. I know personally I get comfortable with shapes, with doing a thing. Like I can sculpt the same thing a million times over and over now, something I've done before, because it is a shape relationship that I'm comfortable with. Like I know that right now this area of my sculpt is something that I like, partially because it's appealing shapes to me, but also it's shapes that I have done before. Like I know it is a shape that I've done before. So trying to break away from that, being conscious of it, is actually very difficult, especially when you're under time crunch and you're working. If you're working for another client or a project, and you have deadlines, that can be really hard to do. To say, I'm not going to do the same shapes and the same everything that I've always done. I'm going to look for new patterns. I'm going to look for repetitions. I'm going to look for things that I don't normally do. Whereas this right now, like I'm saying, is kind of something I normally would do. You can kind of see it here. This figure 8 shape I've done. Try breaking up with other forms. I have that sculpt underneath this sculpt. So there's one directly underneath that was deflated. So what I'm doing is I'm actually just pushing into the outside sculpture, and I'm finding some new shapes on the inside sculpture that were already there. They're based off of the previous, iterations or whenever I decided to do this. I kind of want to create like a shape rather than doing like this shape, which is what I would normally do, which I think works. I'm trying to mimic some of this shape. I almost just kind of want to create like another element to this thing. I almost deleted it, which means I should be saving, because I haven't saved. Got a question from Twitch. Hey there, how do you take this version and create realistic renders. That's the process you miss. Um, we're a ways away from that process right now, to be honest. It depends on what your final render is, what your final goal is. I think that's important to note because if you want this to be some hyper-realistic render, you know, where it's got crazy amounts of detail and it's poor level detail, and you know, you zoom into the eyeball, that's one level, right, at which you could do this. The next is, you know, is this a concept painting where I'm using this as a reference point and I'm kind of just, you know, using this as inspiration to paint over. It's another way to do it. One is I'm making this a production model, and this is something where I need to spend, you know, hours UVing and creating proper textures, and, you know, one is I'm going to render this in Keyshot, and I'm going to toss this over, and I'm going to do paint over. So the answer to your question is hard to get to because it's kind of all dependent on what your goal is, right? Are you creating this for a character artist portfolio? Are you creating this for a concept art portfolio? Are you creating this just for fun, right? Like, what is the goal? And if your goal, for me, most of the time, my goal is to do kind of concept illustration design stuff where I'm exploring characters, I'm exploring shapes, and it's not about, for me, I don't love doing the super hyper realistic renders where you can zoom up onto them, you know, recreations of people. That's not my favorite types of work to do. It is some other people's types of work, but it's not mine. So my goals are to get something where it's the sculpt is relatively finished. It doesn't have to be 100% finished, but it is something that's pretty finished. And then I'll render it in like in the previous series, which would be here on my ArtStation. You can take a look at these. They're all on Twitch or YouTube, whatever you're watching. It looks like you're on Twitch. You can find them in our playlist. You can see how I made all of these characters here. So from the very beginning to the end of making the base meshes for this, sculpting these, texturing these, rendering it. This one's in Marmoset. Rendering, sculpting, rendering, texturing in Unreal, right? This is also in Unreal. And you can go through the process, if this one loads, you can go through the process of this on all of them. So I check those out, but it all depends on what your goal is. You know, are you wanting to do some crazy final, most hyper-realistic renders you've ever seen, or is it the idea or concept? How comfortable are you with painting over? Do you want to paint over? Do you want to live by itself in a pure 3D space or not? You're doing it for 3D print, right? Maybe just as a hobby or fan art. Again, I guess the question would be like, how far do you want that to go? Like, even if let's just go to ArtStation right now. Right, we'll see stuff like this. We'll see stuff like this. This is super realistic, right? This is somebody's fan art of Rusty, right? From this. This is somebody's personal fan art or personal project, which is super realistic, right? The quality of the textures, the quality of the lighting, the quality of everything is really cool, but it's really finished, right? Whereas something maybe more like, a lot of this stuff is super realistic. Even this is fan art. Like, this is super realistic fan art. Like, are you wanting to take it to this level? Or to compare it to my work, like, are you wanting to take it, you know, to this level? This is fan art that has a lot of paint over. It's not fully 3D. You know, this is not fully, some of these are not fully 3D concepts. This is not fully 3D, right? Or is it, you know, what level you want to take it to? So this looks like it's 3D with a lot of paint over on it, because I can see the sketches or some paint over, and this is the 3D. So again, the goal, I think, is the answer is dependent on what your goal is, of how far you feel like you need to take it for what you want it to look like. So if you want to do or need to do or want to do something that's really hyper realistic, you would need to spend a lot of time in textures. You would need to spend a lot of time in materials, a lot of time in lighting, a lot of time in, you know, proper UVs, and kind of going through the proper character modeling process. That would be a key component to it. If that's not important to you, then you just need to get a sculpt and then paint over the sculpt, or render it in something like a keyshot or a renderer that's going to help you out on some of those processes, but it's not a standard production workflow. And that stuff you can all find on the Archetype series. You can also watch our Creature Corner stream on Tuesdays with Jared Krzyzewski, where he creates creatures and does concept artwork for them. He and Matt Millard both stream on that show, that series, and they use Keyshot, and they use a different process than I use. So it's all dependent on what your goal is, what you want to do with it, what you don't want to do with it. Hard to answer. It's really what a bishop would look like. Yeah, it's I can see that. I think the bishop, you know, obviously the bishop come from the cardinal and the pope, right? Those hats, which is a very specific type of iconography designed to show a position of power. So there's some intentionality there, I think. The overall gesture of this piece is getting a little lost. We're going to try a little quick cheat. Now we're going to have to do some work on it, but we'll do it this way first. Don't have to draw what you don't see. Don't have to sculpt what you don't see. I had some more feminine shapes in there, so I'm going to see what that could look like, just being a little more heavier up here. Quite like that, actually. Getting a little bit more roundness into the shape, which I'm enjoying. Might do like a B, C, looking for cloth move. Do you do arms and legs as separate meshes for animation, or you just pop a rig into a full figure? Typically, a full figure. Just looking for shapes, seeing if there's something else in there that might be interesting. Kind of breaking the pattern there with that, but I think something that I had like one that was just kind of in the middle before. Just a shape. When you go to a new subdivision level, oh, sorry, when do you go to a new subdivision level, or do you keep the low poly sculpt? I usually try to keep the low poly sculpt as long as possible. And I keep it as long as possible because I want to be able to do T-pose master, UV master, and all that fun stuff. Regardless, if I do delete it, almost every time I will end up doing Z remesh and you know, creating something specific for that. I think I like this. I like this line. I don't like that line. I feel like it does need something. There's just like some points. Should I like Google and look for videos of my inspirations of filmmakers, see how they started their career? I mean, you could probably look for videos, but you could also just look for their career. Go through their IMDb page, look for interviews about them, look for their bios about them. Like somebody said before, like George Lucas. There's tons of stuff on George. There's tons of stuff on Kevin Eastman and Peter, who made Ninja Turtles. Like there's all kinds of stuff where you can understand where they were, where they came from, how they got into what they got into. Loads of stuff. The internet is full, absolutely full of that kind of stuff. So yeah, start there. You nailed it. A lot of people also ask me this, and this is something that I think I started with when I was younger in my career. You know, you start doing a costume figure, like most people start with a nude body and then start adding stuff to it, and that's fine. But if you feel like you can get there without it, it'll speed up your process so much more if you can avoid that. Meaning, like, I have a character that looks like they have clothes on, even though there is no like naked body underneath. Have I messed around with Nomad, Sculpt for iPad? I have. Nomad and Forger. I like them. They're both cool. I think I need to spend more time with them. Just because I think having spent so much time in Zbrush, I feel very comfortable in Zbrush and like the things that I can do in the actions and how I access those and just a general kind of workflow stuff. But I have done a couple quick sculpts, an hour, spent an hour or 2 hours in the programs, and I quite like them. I think there's a huge potential for them. So definitely something that I will be playing with more in the future. It's also just nice to not have to be trapped at your computer. I love doing this type of work, but there are definitely times where I'm like, I'm kind of stuck here, like at this location, doing this thing, until so sitting at your computer all day, every day, working, doing art is fun, but sometimes you want to not be at your computer and do art. So that's why I'm mostly excited about iPad sculpting apps. Obviously, things like Procreate have changed the game for drawing that way. I think the legs make that shape up enough. I didn't need to continuously reinforce it with the same thing over and over and over. So I'm breaking this up to something that's a little different. Probably I end up having some layers in it. So maybe like this front section here, comes over like this. Even if it does make the shape, it doesn't need to be as extreme. I'm not loving this though. Maybe it's cut in the inverse, so this is the inside. There's something there, but I'm not quite sure where it is right now. So, something like this is probably my stopping point for today. We're actually out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I think that is going to be our wrap up for today. So this is the ruler from more or less scratch is where we got to today. So we started with the head. We kind of sculpted the head from a basic shape and, adding all these other little elements to it. And this is where we are today. So we kind of got a nice starting point for our ruler, our first humanoid character in the Archetype series. And yeah, thank you so much for everybody for joining me on the stream today. If you've never seen the stream, like, follow, subscribe, all that kind of fun stuff so you can get more notifications about what we do here at Gnomon. This stream we do on Wednesdays. We'll also be doing a stream on Fridays called Voice in the Hollow, where you can watch a short film get made in Unreal Engine 5, basically from scratch. Similar process that I'm doing here on this type of work, but for a short film, and they'll cover characters, environments, effects, all that kind of cool stuff. We also do a stream on Tuesday evenings, which is called Creature Corner with Jared Grashevsky, where he takes creature ideas and sculpts them, renders them as well. And then we also do events every now and then on Thursdays, and we do some on Friday afternoons as well. So like, follow, subscribe, and you will get access to all those cool notifications and emails and stuff like that to know when we're going to be streaming. One last question. Somebody says, when saving, did I save it as a tool or as a file? I prefer tools, but that's because I don't want to save everything in my desktop or my workspace, but that's about it. Cool. All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. Hope you have a wonderful day. We'll see you then. Bye.